Thank you very much for coming to this first screening of Our Kids, Their Screens, The Evidence. So, first of all, I'll say a few words, and then our panellists will introduce themselves, and then we'll show the film, and then you'll be able to ask some questions. And we've got some people who are dialing in remotely, and they'll ask some questions too. So, my name's Miranda Wilson, and I set up TechToff about 3 years ago after reading about rape culture in schools. And of course I was horrified, and I got quite obsessed with researching what was going on with our kids and screens and unfettered online access. I put a lot of that research into a website, and I created guides for parents to know how to set controls and what to know about Snapchat and TikTok and so on. And I thought that my website would fly around the world and change would happen because parents would be aghast at what they learned. And of course, things aren't that easy, which is why, I'm actually really hopeful that with health professionals for Safer Screens, we are going to reach a tipping point of positive change, and things will start happening. And of course, Keir Starmer's very fond of talking about change, isn't he? So you'd think that this would be an easy win for him. So for a bit of context, I'm the mother of 2 teenagers. I didn't get things right myself and have experienced a few problems, including one particularly low point when I was trying to take my daughter's phone off her when she was 14, and she didn't want to hand it over at bedtime. So I snatched it and smacked it on the windowsill and cracked it, and she howled, and it was kind of, it all got a bit nuclear and unpleasant. But big tech is getting to our children younger and younger. And we've all seen toddlers in their pushchairs glued to a screen, while the beautiful world just kind of fades into the background. And I spoke to a chap recently who said that his 1-year-old won't eat unless he's in front of a screen. And these stories are grim, but they're also not as grim as what has happened to some children and what some parents like Ellen here has experienced. So what this government and previous governments have said is that we don't have enough evidence about the harms. The fact is, across a lot of academic literature and clinical practice, the evidence is overwhelming. So we really do need urgent change. And with children getting younger and younger on these devices, the fact is that the statistics are getting worse and worse across every marker of child well-being. I want this to be a positive event. I want us all to go away thinking about how I want you to go away thinking about how maybe you could help. And with that in mind, I'm going to let our panellists introduce themselves. Becky, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mim. So my name's Dr. Becky Fulgham. I'm an NHS GP, and I'm also a parent of teens. I've got a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 20-year-old, and also had my own fair share of issues. I'm founder of Health Professionals for Safer Screens, and we are a collective of health professionals from all different specialties. So we've got consultant paediatricians, neurodevelopmental psychiatrists, physiotherapists, social workers, physios, OTs, and we work alongside academic researchers as well. And we've been spending the last year furiously collecting evidence from international research bases, and that is really our purpose, to collate and share the evidence that we found and use that to instruct guidance to help educate other professionals and parents.
My name's Ellen Rear, and I'm not a health professional. I don't know if that's picking up. Okay. Can you hear me back there? I'll shout a bit louder. I'm a bereaved mum to a 14-year-old who set about trying to find out what my son was seeing on social media a year ago. There was when I walked in and my 14-year-old had ended his own life, and there was nothing found offline, so the inquest didn't discover that he was being bullied. There was no sign of mental health. There was just nothing. about why he might have ended his life. So I went to the social media companies a year ago and said, can I have his data? I want to see what he's been looking at, because you hear so much about the negativity of social media. And as a parent, you have no legal right to see what your 14-year-old child was looking at, which to me, I found shocking. He was a child. And so I started my campaign for Jules Law to obtain the right to see children's social media. I tailored that to when a child dies, because I do understand that there is a risk when a child's alive that the parents might be the perpetrator. But when a child dies, I think it should be preserved and requested automatically, because it forms part of the evidence of why a child might have taken their lives. I'm now part of the Bereaved Families Online Safety Group, and if you heard some of the stories about our children that have died over whether they were blackmailed, whether it's extortion, whether they were being bullied so much that they took their own life, and you hear all of these stories, it's heartbreaking. And I was a naive parent. I gave my child a phone and I got it wrong, and I wish I could have taken that away from him. I wish I could have made a difference. And I don't know it was social media. My gut feeling, my strong belief is that it was something he'd seen online, because there's nothing offline. But I absolutely think we need to do more to protect children online. And ideally, if they can't make it safe, get that social media and get it off them. And delay giving your child a smartphone. I wish I had it done. It could have made a difference.
Can you hear me? Yes? Dr. Federico Campos. I am a psychiatrist. I'm a medical doctor, I'm a psychiatrist. I used to work in the NHS. I left 4.5 years ago. I now work in private practice in London, and I mostly look after children and adolescents with ADHD and autism. So that's my specialty. And my involvement with screens has been quite gradual, and from two different perspectives. One is professional. So I started seeing a few years ago with my patients more and more problems coming with kids who made high use of screens, high rates of anxiety, of depression, and of course ADHD, which I think is something we can talk about later. So I started asking more and more about screens to my patient when I see them in clinic, and it was pretty apparent that there was a very, very strong link between high screen use and mental health conditions in young people, even very young children. And I think the evidence was still emerging at that point, but then, as we said, the evidence now is really, really incontrovertible. We have this problem where a lot of people say, well, there isn't really a causal link, so you cannot prove that screens cause these things. But my opinion, and I think it's shared by many other people, is that if you have a clear pathway when you can sort of theorize that screens can cause these problems, and screens are taking away kids' time from all the other things in real life they should be doing instead of being on the screen, that is enough to take action. And I think we need to do something very quickly. And then the other perspective is, as a dad of a 13-year-old, again, I've been across most of the struggles that a lot of parents have in terms of trying to get screens away. I think I had the fortune of having maybe my knowledge was slightly more than the average parent, because I do this for a living. And despite that, it was often a battle. And what I always say to my patients, I remember, like every dad, I would, video every single second of my son's life when he was little. And every single video would end with Ethan say, I want to see. He wanted a screen. So I already, could see how these screens attracted young people. And so again, throughout the years, I started looking into these things more, and then I met with Becky and Bella and became part of the gang and trying to make a difference.
Great. I'm Arabella Skinner. I'm the Policy Director at Health Professionals for Safer Screens. So I work with Becky and Fed. I've been in this space for a while with other organisations working around here. So part of my role is helping to pull together a lot of the evidence, and also we work a lot with politicians and policymakers trying to shift the dial and support them making a difference. I think the one thing I'd really like everyone here to take out of this session is we talk a lot about teenagers. That's really, really serious. But actually, if you think about what's happening in our early years and our toddlers and our young children, we don't know what's coming. What we've seen now is nothing compared to where we're going in the future. But there's a real chance to make a difference now. And if we can shift the dial and we can get public health campaigns in and we can get movement around that and awareness, we have an opportunity to avoid that.
Thank you, Bella. Can everyone hear at the back? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
There was a bit of a-
okay. So now we're going to watch our film.
Yeah.
There's something happening to children born in the last 20 years. They are not living the lives they should be living.
We're seeing increasingly younger children with issues like very poor sleep, body image concerns,
myopia, musculoskeletal conditions.
Poor social skills, delayed speech and language, poor attention and listening skills.
Behavioural disorders, an increase in mood disorders, anxiety.
And the first thing I ask parents is, how long does your child spend on the screen?
Our kids are telling us that they are having issues with these devices.
We found 1 in 8 young people were asking for help to cut down their usage.
They are using screens in a way that you would describe as being addictive.
It fits all the criteria. They use it too much. They know it's bad for them. They find it difficult to stop using, and they often feel annoyed when people criticize them for their use. And if you think about what I just said, that summarized perfectly what an average 15-year-old will be with their smartphone.
Teachers are telling me they're getting more non-verbal children starting school.
And at the moment, about 15 to 20% of all children are becoming short-sighted.
The core problem here, people don't know that this is dangerous. Parents don't know that allowing, their 1 and 2-year-old accessing screens for hours every day will interfere with their language development. In fact, there's many parents out there who think that they're trying to help their child.
There are over 500,000 apps that are described as educational. Hardly any of them have any data to back up that claim.
YouTube Shorts, Instagram, TikTok. All these apps are designed to be addictive. They're designed to play on that reward pathway in kids that is underdeveloped compared to adults.
We know so little about what the consequences are. We have no understanding what the future holds.
This is not about tech innovation and AI. This is poorly children.
And like most big companies that want to make money, big tech, they won't change. We cannot expect them to regulate themselves.
And if we don't do something about this, there is a worry that there will be 10 to 20% of the adolescent population who will be, broken people.
We can't blame parents.
People who blame parents clearly don't have kids.
Everyone is struggling with this.
Our legislators are going to have to be braver with how we regulate in this space.
What we need is really good public health information from a trusted source.
We don't want the government focusing purely on science and innovation. We want them to think about what's actually safe and healthy for our children.
So we need the government to pass stricter regulation to force big tech to take responsibilities.
Health professionals for Safer Screens are requesting an urgent public health campaign to give parents the facts.
We're not anti-tech. I'd like to understand the benefits and risks of tech.
We need to focus on what we can do to improve the situation.
Unplug us from the wall, we still work. We're human beings.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So obviously there are a number of things that film doesn't cover, like the increase in child-on-child sexual abuse, horrific stuff, pornography and so on. However, this is where we are. So would you like to ask some questions? Yes.
My question's for Dr. Campos.
Sorry, can you put it through the stream?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Campos, my question's about educational apps. What are your feelings about them? Are they okay to kids to use?
I think Sandy, who you saw in the video, she's the expert. Well, the thing is, there's no such thing as educational app, because if you look at what the framework should be with educational app, I think the figures, more than 95% of them aren't. So they don't meet the criteria for what can be defined as an educational app. The problem is that gives the parents sort of reassurance, a sense of reassurance where they feel, okay, it's fine to give my 5-year-old a smartphone because it's education. The truth is, first of all, they don't really work because kids don't learn that way. It's very often gamified, so the kids learn something, but they also learn that they have that instant reward every time they do something, which is quite a dangerous pattern if you look at development of ADHD-like symptoms or even addictions later in life. And the other problem, which I mentioned before, at the beginning before the film, is that the educational app is taking time away from the kind of real life experiences that children need. The problem is, big tech has sort of tried to convince parents that they need all these sort of fancy apps for the children to learn. The truth is that most of us, looking at ages around the room, we fairly reasonably well-adjusted adults, I think, and we didn't need all the fancy apps. We managed through school and relationship, etc. That is what kids need. They need to be out, about, play with other kids, interact with other kids, interact with adults. So for a child, it's much better to just go with mum, do some shopping, and learn to read the label of food packaging, or pay the bill at a restaurant, or ask the waiter for something. That is way more educating than the apps. So again, we probably need a bit more regulation around how these apps are promoted and what is potential harm to kids.
Tim.
Thank you. I think there's a very strong case for schools taking smartphones away from students. Have you spoken to the National Union of Teachers about this? Are they on board? Because it seems as if you could get all teachers to be signed up for this. That would be one win.
Yes, what's really interesting is pretty much all the unions in their conferences in April time, they all do them over Easter, they're all calling for a ban of social media for 16-year-olds. For 16-year-olds. For 16-year-olds, they're all calling for a ban of social media before 16. And they're very, very clear on that because they see massive problems within their schools. One of the heads of the union actually described social media as a lethal weapon for children, which is pretty damning. They see it as a massive problem for their teachers because the teachers are terrified because they're being filmed on these screens. And they're being filmed, and then it all gets out on social media, or it goes out to parents, or they get criticised. And then you also have the problem of kids filming each other in the playground and not looking at each other. So there's social media, they're all absolutely very, very clear on social media. The NEU are there, the NASU, WT, ASCL, they all support the social media. There is much more of a groundswell getting there now for smartphones in schools and a ban around smartphones in schools. Some of the schools, the unions have come out for that. So the NASU, WT, they have catchy names, don't they? Have come out for that. And the NEU, Daniel Kebede, the president of the NEU, has in his personal capacity talked about a smartphone ban, but they haven't yet voted as the NEU to do that. But yes, compared to where they were sort of 2 years ago, absolutely, the professionals are calling for it. One of the things that we spend a lot of time with health professionals is talking to other professionals, so social workers, teachers, police, other people who are touched by this problem and see it as a problem, and it's pretty groundswelling.
So do we know when a vote will come up, where this will suddenly become the official
I think they probably have to wait till their next conference to vote.
So
because I think
next conference,
next
yeah.
conference. But he has spoken out in a personal capacity quite clearly about it, and the feeling is very much towards that. But they have, as a council, they have as an NEU called for a social media ban for 16-year-olds, for under 16-year-olds.
Do you mind if I add to that?
Yeah, of
So
course.
It needs to be a proper ban, because I
Yes.
raised this with a school in my area, and I said, well, you need a phone ban. And they said, we've got a phone ban.
Yeah.
I went, not really. The kids still use their phones. They just have it in their bag and they get it in playtime. It needs to be a proper ban. It needs
Yeah.
to be, give them a break during the day, get it out of the school. Not this, yes, we have a ban, we do our bit. It's not good enough in my opinion.
Yeah, and Ellen's absolutely right. All the evidence says, and this is where it's madness. So the DofE say, oh, 97% of schools have a ban. Well, they have a policy, and that can be in my bag. And we know from the psychological research that having it in your bag still pulls your attention, and it still takes it. There's been tests where it shows that students who had their phones in another room did better in the same test as students who had their phone off in a bag in their room, and that's been repeated. So it doesn't work. And we know of schools that had said they had a ban, implemented a proper ban, as in they drop it off at the beginning of the day and pick it up at the end of the day, and everything has gone through the roof. So their truancy has gone down, their teacher retention has gone down, the teachers have had to rewrite all their classwork because they're getting through it so much quicker. But probably more importantly, they've seen the children engage in being children. So they've had visitors come to the school and go, oh, your children seem quite immature, they're secondary. And it's like, no, they're not, they're playing football, or they're flirting, or they're running after snow, or they've noticed things like children opening doors for the teachers, and they put that to the fact they're in the moment. So they would say that it's fundamentally shifted the mentality of their children, and things like bullying out of school has gone down because most problems are solved and they don't escalate into a sort of social media frenzy. So yeah, Ellen's absolutely right. We need to be very careful in the language of ban, because what a lot of schools and what DofE say, Department of Education say about a ban is not a real ban.
And can I just add to that all the schools who have implemented a proper ban see the grades go up.
Yep.
So there we go, there's the proof.
Yeah, I noticed that in Australia, I think earlier this year, they passed legislation banning children from having social media accounts until they're 16. Do you think that's enforceable? Because one of the things I saw from the legislation that the companies have 12 months to introduce it. They only have to make reasonable efforts. Well, how do you define what a reasonable effort is? So do you think it's appropriate to ban children? Is that too authoritarian? Do you think it can work? And is there any evidence that it can work? Are there any countries or places where this has been done, where there's evidence that it helps children?
I think the answer to the main question is we have to get age verification right. So we have to find a way that we can verify age online. And the Age Verification Association feel very strongly that they do have the tools in place and they can do it. I was at a conference recently where they were talking and they were saying that they do have a lot of things in place, they can do it. They're doing it already at cinemas, so you often have facial recognition at cinemas for people trying to buy tickets and doing this. And they've got ways of doing this that avoid the whole privacy problem, so they don't store the information, they find ways in and out. If we can get age verification to work, then we can have a proper conversation around social media, because then there's no excuse of not implementing it in a reasonable way. And honestly, if these guys can put people in space, their girlfriends off in space, or, you know, off creating AI bots, if they put their minds to it, they can get age verification working. They just haven't had the incentive to make them do it. So I think the great thing about Australia and New Zealand, they're at least talking about the problem and they're addressing it as a problem. The question is going to be, what do you actually define as social media? Because they've taken WhatsApp app out and they've taken YouTube out. We know that WhatsApp is one of the worst places for child sexual grooming because it's totally encrypted end to end. It's a serious problem for the police. And YouTube is, you can find anything on YouTube. if you really want to get there. So that's a really big question mark about what you choose and what you put in. Personally, we would say that actually under 16 shouldn't have access to internet-enabled social media or smartphones, because that needs to help partly solve that problem. Because there are lots of things that we wouldn't think of being a problem, but something, for example, like a fitness app is a huge issue for children with eating disorders. And it's also it's almost like social media, because it has lots of the information in there, lots of the sort of influencer areas in there. And it also has the ability for you to talk to other people within it. So there's lots of things that don't class as classic social media, but are actually problems for our children.
Thank you, Bella. Let's have some more questions.
We've got a follow-up. Wants to follow up.
Gentleman here in the black
sorry.
t-shirt.
Yes.
Do you think there's a direct link between an increase of ADHD diagnosis and screen usage?
Oh yes, 100%. I have more to say about that. Yes, okay. Definitely yes. So in I'll just talking to Zach now. My clinic, just to give you an example, I work in a private clinic. We mostly look after kids with ADHD. When I started, I joined my colleague, Dr. Geroli, 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago. There were just the two of us, doctors, clinicians seeing kids. Now it's 20. So in 5 years, we went from 2 clinicians to 20, just to cope with the demand. NHS waiting times are 4 years in rural Yorkshire, but even in London, it's sort of 2-3 years. So if you have a young child and you're worried about them, there's very likely you have to wait for 2 or 3 years before you can be seen in the NHS. Which is already sad per se, because people, when I talk to people and they say, well, I work in private practice, say, oh, only the super rich that come and see you. Truth is, no. A lot of people have regular jobs and they put the money together because they cannot afford to wait for 3 years to go and see somebody in the NHS. So the problem with ADHD, there are two problems with ADHD and screens. One is there is a lot of misdiagnosis, because if you think about somebody who uses screens all the time, you will realize that they are distracted all the time because they're constantly checking the phone. So because they might be on TikTok and they don't realize it's been 3 hours, they procrastinate their homework. They do their homework with the phone there, so they get distracted and it takes forever, they make a lot of mistakes. When you talk to them, they don't listen, they look like distracted because again, they're checking their phone. And what I'm just listing, those are the symptoms of ADHD. So if you have somebody who's not really well trained in recognizing ADHD, they'll just get you to tick some boxes. So, oh yeah, you have 6 out of the 9 symptoms, so you have ADHD, and that is dangerous. And then, so that is one problem. On the other hand, you have the problem that a lot of people, some clinicians, and I'm one of them, we think that we are creating some sort of a screen-induced ADHD. So that can be sort of acquired ADHD. The real ADHD is strongly genetic. So you normally have a parent or a relative with ADHD, and it's a neurodevelopmental condition. So there are changes in the brain that cause the symptoms. The problem is, if you give a screen to a very young child, their brain will develop in a way that resembles ADHD, because their threshold for being able to wait for things to happen, their attention span, the threshold will be very low. And there's a lot of plasticity in the brain, especially in children and young people. So if they grow up used to the fact that they can have everything at any time on a phone without any effort, that is their threshold. So if you grew up for years and years and years without some instant gratification, you've been used to that, how likely is it that you will sit and do maths for 2 hours or revise for GCSEs, etc.? And this sounds a bit like bro psychology, but it's actually, there is the neuroscientific explanation for that. I'm oversimplifying, so if anyone in the room knows about neuroscience, please forgive me. But one of the problems with ADHD is there is a relative lack of something called dopamine in the brain that controls attention, motivation, reward. The human body and the human brain are smart. So if you have too much of something, your body will become less sensitive to it. So if you have lots of dopamine, because of this instant gratification, your brain will become less sensitive to it. So you have a higher threshold for what stimulates you to be focused and interested. So again, years of scrolling, years of TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, especially Instagram, that is where the bar is set in your brain. So, and we're seeing a lot of problems now because the kids who grew up at that age with phones, now they are teenagers, early 20s. And we're seeing the problems now.
Thank you, Fed. Actually, I think I want to get one question out just in case we don't have time to answer it. And I'd like to ask you, Becky, isn't this a parenting issue?
Oh, poor parents. We are there.
Yes.
I would very strongly defend the parents at the moment because we're not giving parents the information. So when I'm at work and these devices now are ubiquitous for the image of a child for me, I mean, from doing a baby check, notice that they're attached to the prams or the pushchairs, the toddler sibling is stuck to the iPad, they might even be further engrossed with the headphones on. You just casually say to the mother of that child, just be a little bit careful with the iPad and that toddler because they can become short-sighted if they're on these devices too much. No idea. Parents have no idea of the risks to their speech and language, that they are hearing and speaking significantly fewer words for every minute they are on these devices under 5. And that's why our guidance very strongly says that children under 2 shouldn't be on these things at all, and between 2 and 5, about half an hour, and doing something like, family FaceTime, that sort of thing. But actually the average time our toddlers are on them in this country, reports are saying, the 0 to 2s is an hour a day. That's definitely an hour more than they should be, and it will be an underestimate for so many children. And then our 2 to 4s, it's 2 hours a day plus. So you think about these speech and language knock-ons, sleep knock-ons, their eyesight. Parents do not know about this. And I think, like Bella was saying, we're stuck on this merry-go-round of teenagers and mental health and the impacts, which is profoundly important. But actually, changing the behaviours is going to have to start from the beginning. And yes, parents are so important here because their smartphone and media use is fundamental to how those media habits develop in the children. We've got good evidence of that now, but we've got to take them on the journey with us, and we cannot possibly say as clinicians, you should not have them on screens when they are totally unable to answer the question as to why. We need to give them the information, and that's where we start. And our argument would be that the NHS should be doing this because the money that they will save in the long term is immense. Just looking at the cost of preventable prescriptions for children and their short-sightedness, it costs £12,000 per child minimum to the NHS to do their appointments, to do their glasses. So the NHS needs to take this because when the NHS has it, you reach patients in all settings. And we are very strongly finding, aren't we, that our most vulnerable children are the worst impacted by these screens. And so our public health campaign has to be visible to everyone, and we would like it to be from preconception. When they come in and they're planning having a pregnancy, that we're talking to them about screens, and all the way through in their red books, posters in the waiting rooms, NHS guidance specific to screen use and the types of devices that might be harmful at a certain age. At the moment, we're doing nothing. So until we can actually give the information to parents, we cannot possibly blame parents.
Thank you. Yes, lady in the green dress.
Thanks very much. Some parents I've spoken to say they would rather their kids sort of get used to digital devices while they're kind of living at home under their supervision. What evidence is there that actually the teenage brain or children's brains are kind of less equipped to deal with the addictive nature of screens at that stage?
Yeah.
Can I just add something that goes along with that? You're citing all this evidence, and so when you pick up the New Scientist magazine recently, they said, they quoted a study saying there isn't evidence to show that phones have a negative impact. So again, just adding into that evidence, just playing devil's advocate.
I always reply with this. There is no evidence that smoking tobacco is bad, because what they describe as evidence is the gold standard, which is double-blind controlled trial, meaning that if you want to study that in tobacco, you need to have two groups of people, give 2 packs of cigarettes a day to one group, and nothing to the other group. And then follow them up for 20 years and see who dies of lung cancer. We've never done this. So if that is the gold standard, then we don't have evidence to say that tobacco is bad. And indeed, with phones, it's very similar. If you look back 50, 60, 70 years, smoking was considered okay, even healthy. I still remember the old ads with the doctor smoking Camel in the clinic. And now it's the same with screens. People think it's fine. So I think it's very reasonable. When you don't have the gold standard level of evidence, you look at what you do have, which is a lot of association study. We have a lot of causality in certain studies, like the one Bella mentioned before, about kids with phone left outside of the room, they perform much better in terms of focus, in terms of academic achievements. And now, of course, you have to forgive me, I'm Italian, so I tend to talk a lot. I lost sight of what the first question was.
So is there something about children and teenagers' brains that makes them particularly susceptible to the sort of addictive nature of social media?
Yeah.
Are they ready for it later? Is there an argument to delay because their brain can deal with it better then?
Yes. And it's, I mean, on a very basic level, would you get a 10-year-old to drive a car? No, because their nervous system is immature. Up to the age of 25, your nervous system is still maturing, creating new connections. And you don't have the skills in terms of motor skills, social skills, communication skills, and they need to learn those. And they don't learn those from social media. And the thing is, social media gives, we all agree, social media is not reality, right? Okay, it's not a true reflection of what real life is. So if you get a 10-year-old on social media, they will grow up thinking that is reality. And they will have a similar problem with pornography and a lot of other things. So it's purely a matter of neuroplasticity. You're taking the most vulnerable time in a child's life when their brain is actively developing, creating new networks, and you're spoiling that network towards something that they will find very difficult to recover from, because it's not always reversible. That's the problem. Once you get to 20, 25 years of age, those networks are there. Yeah, you can still remodel them, but a lot of that is ingrained in your brain, so it's really tricky to change.
Thank you, Fed. I've got a question for Ellen. Do you think parents know what their kids are looking at?
Definitely not. I think it's becoming more. I mean, I've actually had people openly say it's your fault your son died because you let him have a mobile phone. I've had it should have been so stupid to allow him to do it. Well, I didn't do it knowing that my child might look at something harmful. I didn't know, and I'm a well-educated, normal, pretty grounded person, and I didn't know. I thought TikTok was silly dance routines. And I remember looking at TikTok in lockdown, and some of my staff were saying, we should do this silly routine. I was like, well, I'm not getting involved in that, it's just the kids dancing. And I didn't understand the harmful things. I don't think I really understood until this last year when I looked into what was my child seeing on social media, because there's nothing else offline, and the pornography, the violent images. I'm talking to other children who said, oh yeah, we've seen a beheading. You know, and I think, oh my God, did my son see that? I don't know, because they won't show me. But, you know, they are seeing really harmful graphic material. And if I had known that, you know, when Jules was alive, there's absolutely no way I would have said, tough parenting, you're not having it. But I didn't know how harmful it was.
Can I just add one thing, just to add on this? It's not just the parents, we need to act at a higher level, because if you don't have the legislation to ban phones in school, etc., then you can take the phone away from the child, but then somebody else in school will show the same videos. So it's important that as a standard that we get screens off kids.
But I didn't know until Jules died that Jules had seen it on his computer, not just his phone, his computer. So one thing is getting the phones out their hands, but also off the computer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
What's happening with the Online Safety Act?
Can you repeat your question?
What is currently happening with the Online Safety Act?
So the Online Safety Act is now an act. It took sort of 6 years to get there, which I think gives you an idea of how glacially slow government moves, and it's very, very complex. And if you think of how much the world has moved on since, I think 2017 was sort of the first white paper that they actually started talking about it. So the Act came into play, 18 months ago. We now have the Children's Codes, which were a piece of work which looked at what big tech or tech, any companies should be doing. And they came into play about 3 weeks ago, a month ago. But they have a lot of context in them. So it's a lot about whatever they can reasonably do. The comments that you made about is what the technology companies can reasonably expect to do. It's meant to, and I say meant to, it's meant to take away the worst, access to porn. It's meant to take away the worst of the kind of eating disorder videos. It's meant to take away the suicidal indentation, the harmful content, all of which shouldn't even be on there anyway, in there. Whether it does or not is a different matter. And that the proof will be in the pudding. Can Ofcom Ofcom has the power to fine big tech 10% of their revenue. We know that when one of the, I think it was the ICO, fined TikTok 2 years ago for data breaches, they're still in court. That's not going to be heard for another 18 months, and that's the first round. So we're setting ourselves up against these massive companies with massively lawyered up. So even if Ofcom did its best possible job doing it, it's going to be years before anything kind of kicks in. And then you also have the fact that it's only taking the worst content. What it's not doing is all the comparative content that our kids see. It's not going to have the sort of minor levels of bullying or cyberbullying or all of those elements in there. So even if it does what it says on the tin, it won't solve the whole problem. And I think even those people who were heavily involved in the Online Safety Act don't feel that it's going to deliver what they wanted. I think it's also really important to understand that the Online Safety Act is not relevant within schools. So schools are exempt, the schools and EdTech, most of EdTech are exempt from the Online Safety Act, which is mad. So I think Baroness Kidron, who was heavily involved in the process, actually is quoted saying, your child is safer on the school bus than they are in school. And what you're doing there is putting enormous amounts of pressure on the head teachers and the governors, who are supposedly meant to be able to do the same job as the regulators. It's a slight level of madness and lack of joined up thinking. So yeah, I think the intention was right with the Online Safety Act. I don't think it went far enough, and I think it's far too slow in responding. And I don't think tech are quaking in their boots.
Fully agreed. Yeah, they need to do more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bella. And also, of course, Rachel de Souza, the Children's Commissioner, has said it's not fit for purpose.
Yes.
So if she's saying that, then I don't know where we go from there. Okay, any more questions? Yes, gentleman there.
Thank you. What does the evidence show was the impact of lockdown? I.e., was there a peak and it's a gradual decline, or has this continued to escalate?
A lockdown?
Yeah.
Becky, can you answer that one?
I think in terms of, this is turned off by the way, so can everyone hear me? Yeah, just shout. In terms of what you'd expect is for there to be a nosedive in outcomes for children. I think when you look at things like mental health in teenagers, it's just a bit of a blip on a steadily downward trajectory. I think it's interesting to turn the conversation around COVID-19, because we find that it's brought up in every single thing we do. Well, it's because of COVID, it's because of COVID. Well, COVID actually was a really grotesque, unethical experiment on our children as to what harms excessive use of devices at a young age can do. And it created a horrible new distance between parent and children, because we were all suddenly locked in different rooms of the house and numerous devices. I personally had to buy my 9-year-old a laptop, which I never would have done, in order for him to be able to attend school. So I think when you look at all the actual evidence, COVID doesn't really cause much of a blip, and things have continued to get worse since. So if you look at speech and language, for example, in the past 2 years, they've seen something like a 27% increase in referrals to speech and language therapy. So that's down the line from COVID. And that's a pretty bleak picture when we think that 1 in 4 of our speech and language therapy posts in this country are currently unfilled. And we've got 1.9 million children in this country now who need speech and language therapy. So I think all COVID does, when I think about it, is it was a disaster for children, and we should be looking at that's what happens when they have too many screens. So what have we learned? Rather than just blaming it on everything that we're seeing happening, still, even though we're years down the line now. But it is a really interesting dimension. I just don't think we're looking at it quite how we could and should.
Thank you, Becky. That reminds me also of a point that Sandy made, which didn't make it into the film, but she said that children with speech and language developmental delays are more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. So that's quite scary.
And is it 11 times more likely to have difficulty in maths, 6 times more likely to have difficulty in English. 80% of children with speech and language difficulties also have significant mental health disorders. So think about outcomes for those children just on speech and language. This is just one small parameter of the evidence that we have. And from my perspective, I've got an extra qualification in women's health. So I do coils and implants, and I speak to teenagers a lot and do their contraception. And we've had the women's health leaders coming out saying that they are convinced that the massive drop-off in uptake of oral contraception in our young women in particular is due to the misinformation online on platforms like TikTok, which are saying contraception is the new smoking. Elon Musk had a tweet that was seen and shared millions and millions of times saying contraception will make you depressed, it will make you suicidal, it will give you cancer. These are all completely unfounded remarks. And we're seeing now in this country the highest rate of abortions in young women than we have ever seen. And also the teenage pregnancy rate is on its way back up, which is, when you think about the outcomes for that mother and that child, just that one dimension of harm, just looking at dis and misinformation for women's health is enough for me. Because what we're seeing at work is youngsters getting pregnant again. It's a disaster. And then when you look at all the different specialties, this is what we've found, they've all got their own disasters. That's why our group's growing so quickly. And we're seeing specialties come up we didn't even knew existed, like paediatric OTs, with extraordinary stories to tell about how these devices are impacting on children. Paediatric occupational therapist. So there's these specialties that you would think are very niche and somewhat protected, but it impacts on whole child health, which I think is our key message, really.
Thank you, Becky. Any more questions? You've had too many already. Gentleman there in the blue shirt.
Just, if you will, imagine the hypothetical conversation any of us might be having with a teenager about what we're talking about, right? It seems there's nuance in the sort of concept of saying there's two separate issues here. If you're telling people that this is a bad thing at certain times of the day, but it's okay at other times of the day, obviously I'm totally up with what we're saying in an agreement, but if I was a 16-year-old who wanted to make the argument I should be on my phone, for example, your smoking analogy, smoking's bad, black or white. So if you're going to, how would we embrace that as parents? You know, even my 6-year-old would probably make that argument. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so it's okay at this time of the day and it's not okay at that time of the day. And is there a risk that by policing things at certain times of the day, you create a binge at other times of the day? Do you create more issue for the parents in the evening if you're not allowed on things during the day? How would we manage that?
I think it's a really excellent question, because we mustn't conflate issues. And I think it's not all screen time is bad, and certain devices can be useful for children at a particular age. Now, in my house, well, let's go from the guidance. So certain times of day, children should not have devices in their bedrooms. And there's robust evidence now that we know it's impacting on their sleep. We know that. The evidence is very strong. So that's one time of the day when they shouldn't be in there. The devices shouldn't be in their bedrooms. There's also good evidence that the nature of the content that they access is more likely to be inappropriate and harmful if they access this at night. We've got times of day that is powerful for a parent to know about. So parental media use in the daytime, if that's excessive, or, you know, should it be inappropriate even in another room, that child in that house is also evidenced as more likely to access inappropriate media. We know with the rising evidence around food choices and feeling full that if children and adults are watching screens whilst they're eating, they're more likely to eat more and more of the wrong sort of food. So I think you can be quite clear already with the information that we already have about there are times of day when it's completely inappropriate. And I think you mentioned the cliff edge thing, that if they're not on it, are they going to resort to it later? Did you say something like that?
I mean, just if you're told you're not allowed to do something in this bunch of hours, I can imagine a scenario where a load of teenagers go home and in the evening becomes just more social media because you're not allowed on it during the day.
Yeah, so the John Wallace Academy, Damien Macbeth, he has a school from age 2 to 18. And that impact was explained to him or predicted as going to be a problem. If you take their phones off them all day, they're just going to relapse and go on them more when they get home. Well, actually, he's found completely the opposite to be true. And it's like it's broken the addictive cycle. So they have suddenly realised that they can be doing something else and their phones stay off. And then when you look at the Gen Z data that's coming out now, we need to have robust conversations as adults, and we need to model the type of behaviour we're wanting in our children. But actually, you ask my 19-year-old, 20-year-old about these screens, she's like, well, my kid's not having a smartphone until 16, they're a disaster. They're not going on social media. So we are slow and messing this up and taking far too much time. But when they interviewed Gen Zs and surveyed Gen Zs, they are saying, it was a mistake. I regret being on it too much. I would not want this for my children. So I think we're kind of getting there in a very messy way, and the youngsters hopefully will take this forward. But we do have really robust evidence of times in the day where these devices are not suitable. And as parents, I think we need to be really confident in following that guidance, not at the meal table, not in the school day, not overnight in bedrooms. And all devices, especially if they're under 16, need to be in a family place rather than upstairs. So we've got a lot already.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, gentleman in the grey shirt.
Thank you very much. Amazing presentation. Is there a single place where all of this evidence is being collated? And how do we stop the tech companies from suppressing that single place on the internet? Because they do that. And that's not a conspiracy theory. I just read Sarah Wynne Williams'
brilliant book.
expose on Facebook.
Yeah.
And she was saying that, I mean, the reason why America has a ban on social media before 16 is because in America it was exposed that Facebook were deliberately targeting vulnerable teenagers with health products, makeup, gyms, etc. Knowingly, because when they were at their most vulnerable or depressed is when they are most likely to purchase these goods, and that's the same everywhere else.
Yeah.
So how do we stop them from their policy towards this is the same as Peter Thiel called it tobacco. According to Sarah Wynne Williams, we're going to have to take a tobacco-style strategy. So how do we, as a group of concerned parents, get this into, publicise it when they control the narrative?
Who wants to take that juicy question?
Well, it's a big one there. Well, first of all, at Health Professionals, we do spend a lot of time collating a lot of the information and pulling it together. So if you go to our website, we've got briefing packs, which we've actually had to split into two because there's so much evidence now. We have one for early years and one for school aged. And part of a lot of what we do is talking to academics and sort of bringing academics together, because they tend to be focused in very small areas, doing amazing work in small areas. And I think what you'll find in that New Scientist article is they were probably talking about social media and 16-year-olds and is there evidence on that? And is it causal? Whereas actually we need to take everything in the round and how we do that. I don't know how we outsmart big tech on the tech front, but part of it is going to be having offline conversations with people, talking to people about it, going to it. We spend a lot of time talking to parliamentarians, people writing to their MPs. They do care. They genuinely, they're not doing very much at the moment, but there is a groundswell of opinion amongst most MPs that we need something to happen. But actually, we also need to be voting with our feet. We need to be writing to tech companies. I mean, I'm terrible. I've got loads of tech. I've got iPhones, I've got iPads, I've got whatever. Actually, we should be buying the safe devices. People are starting to launch safer devices. We should be moving with our money, and then people would move as well. And yeah, if the more we can get in mainstream, this conversation out through mainstream TV, mainstream radio, mainstream, then which aren't controlled in quite the same way, is really important. And having conversations. It's incredibly powerful having a conversation with your friend, your neighbour, or whoever, just not in a over the top, just as it comes up. Because as we say, people, we don't know. And I think I've been around this for a while, and honestly, I'm genuinely surprised every day with pieces of information that come up. And I can't recommend the Careless People book enough. I've been boring Becky about this. It's a fabulously funny read until you realise it's real. And then it's quite stunningly shocking.
I wanted to add on to that, just to say, to share knowledge. I've always said, if telling my story can save one other life, then I'll tell it. And I regularly talk to a lot of parents and say, do you know that you can do this or whatever? And they go home and talk to their children. Yeah. And the feedback I've had is the kids go, oh my God, have you been speaking to Ellen again? But it's just a knowledge thing. Share it, learn something, pass it on, because that swell of parents and support group and people that pull together and go, come on, we've got to do something about this. And the uprising is getting there, that people are pulling together and saying, we want to make a difference, we want to stop this. Yeah. And so share the knowledge you learn. I think that's massively important.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you. One more question, and then I think we should probably, gentleman in the black shirt.
I was just going to say that I think one of the biggest issues to do with this is to do with children's rights to privacy.
Yeah, tell me about it. That's what I get.
Yeah. So,
you can't see it because they've got a right to privacy.
I mean, just what Mem started off by saying about the fight, with a 14-year-old over the phone, what you were saying about what your son was accessing. I mean, that's a huge thing. So
I was told this week, I was with the Secretary of State last week actually, and the ICO have confirmed that the GDPR doesn't count for children at 13 who have died because they're died. So they were having a meeting, I think it was Baroness Jones was having a meeting with the social media companies to find out what laws they're hiding behind. But the truth is, why won't they give me my data of my son? Yes. And they said, well, actually, so GDPR doesn't count for my son, he's dead. So there could be other children's data on it. Well, they could easily redact that data. So I don't need to see who said it. I want to see whether he was being blackmailed, whether he was being bullied, remove that data, give it to me, or what was he being fed on his algorithms. And apparently, I don't know. I might be able to tell you more next week.
It's to do with those parental rights. Yeah. So, for example, if your children knew that you could access what they were accessing, you wouldn't need to get the phones back off them. Because, if you had a right, because it seems that your group has got two aims that you've talked about. One is to try to stop the use of phones in schools and to pressurise schools to limit access, but also a statutory right, to stop children under 16.
The biggest problem we've got is age verification, which is coming out in July, but most children are, I was going to say lie, maybe.
Of course they do.
They lie. They make their age at a different age. And so whilst things like Instagram have got teens account, which is helping the younger children, that's all very well, but the teens aren't the teens on the platform. I regularly get so-and-so is, 46th birthday today because he's put in his birthday as one of his parents or something. Yeah. So they've got to sort out the age verification so that they know who's on their platform. But they know full well what those kids are searching, and they're searching Pokemon. It's probably not, an older child. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think we would say, when you're talking about rights, we would say the most important right a child has is to be safe, and that has to override everything.
I would agree with that. Yeah. If you remember the Supreme Court case with the issue about contraception. Yeah. for children.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Judge's rule that parents don't have rights, they only have obligations.
Well, children have a right to be safe, and that's the lens we need to be looking at all of this regulation from, and what keeps them safe and what keeps them healthy, and that's where we believe we should start from and end from, actually.
Thank you, and I think we should just, one more question.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, the lady in the green jacket on the panel.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
Forgotten your name, excuse me. You started by saying if we think it's bad now, with some certainty you said this ain't nothing, it's all coming down the line, it's going to be far worse. Could you give us a glimpse of what because I can't imagine it being
I'd like to be proved wrong, because we have managed to get that public health campaigns in, and we have managed to get those communications in and that talk in, so people do change their behaviour and children change that behaviour. But if we're looking at our 15, 16, 17-year-olds now, we're worried about the increase in eating disorders, mental health and all of those areas. Let's remember that they were not children that had their own smartphone, because I didn't have a hand-me-down smartphone to give to my kids because we didn't have them, because they were new, so you wouldn't hand them down. They didn't have access to on-demand TV. They had CBeebies at certain times of the day. They didn't have screens with apps all the time. They didn't go into school and be fed screens all the time. So actually there's a whole load of stuff that our 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds are engaged in, which is, as Fed has spoken in brilliant detail earlier about rewiring brains and changing, that our 16-year-olds didn't have, because it wasn't there. And it's really easy to forget how fast things have moved. So even if you're talking about a 22, 23-year-old and you go, oh, but my child sort of had a smartphone and they were fine. Well, they didn't have 5G, didn't really exist until a couple of years ago, which meant that you could actually download everything constantly. You didn't have the tick button, you didn't have the like button, you didn't have the doom scrolling. All these things are relatively new. So it is moving at a pace we can't even imagine. And when you listen to Mark Zuckerberg talking about the fact that he thinks that smartphones are over and we're going to all be in glasses with virtual reality and everything's going to be on our glasses, I dread to think what your average 15-year-old boy is going to be looking at in those glasses. I mean, seriously? I mean, what? Sorry, and girls. I have boys, so I shouldn't do that. But actually, I do think if we don't grasp this is the figures, as Becky's talked about, for speech and language, they are significantly worse now. And we know that a child that spends 90 minutes on a screen under 2 is having a worse time at 4.5 and 8 in social skills, academic skills, emotional skills. And those aren't the kids that we're seeing at 14, 15, 16 yet.
Like one of our doctors said, we're going to see a generation of broken people. I'd also want to add to that I would love, if anyone in this room wants to help with commissioning a health economy study where we actually extrapolate what might happen, and just in terms of one or two of those harms, and what will be the cost of the economy 10, 20, 30 years down the line of all these issues.
Yeah, but actually, to end on a positive note, you asked, when I say it, if we grasp this, if we get public health out there, if we get Department of Education out there, if we get everyone engaged in this, it's relatively cheap compared to the other things they've got to deal with, and it would turn around pretty fast. So that's our positive note.
Thank you. So just some closing words very quickly. Becky, what would you say to the UK's decision makers in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, I'd say to stop procrastinating, and that we've got more than enough evidence. We've got clinician testimony, we've got academic researcher testimony, we've got teacher testimony, we've got police testimony. And the academic research that's coming out is, this lady said before, there's possibly not some causal evidence. We've got that too. So we can actually tick all the boxes. And the government have more than enough to act now. We need an NHS public health campaign. We need to be acting on the precautionary principle, get all this stuff back and under control, and we prove it's safe before we unleash it on this scale. We don't hang around waiting to prove it's harmful.
Thank you. And Bella, what would you say to everyone in this room who might want to help?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say please sign up to our campaign with TETOF and health professionals. Write to your MPs. It really does actually make a difference when you write to your MPs, and tell people, talk to people about it, make sure people are aware, because the more of us talking about it, the more it becomes common knowledge.
So this film will be on both of our websites, and there's a form you can email your MP and so on, and there's some copy that you can just paste in or write your own. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.